It was the year I was living on my own in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here for a temporary job and it was an excuse for me to live on my own for the first time. I was 22 years old and just out of college. I had an apartment in downtown. I could walk to most things I needed, but I also had my car for when I wanted to branch out or venture out of town. The thing I loved about Asheville and North Carolina in general was the sheer amount of hiking trails. I'd been to many around town, but one I'd not been to was DuPont State Forest. One day, I decided to go. The drive was just under an hour from Asheville. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves were starting to change and it was the perfect time for a hike. I didn't have work that day and it would be a work day for everyone else. It meant I'd probably have the trails all to myself. I got to the parking area for the park and I found where one of the trails began. I walked for a while and the trail was serene. I was the only one out there that day. It was a cloudy day and we'd been getting a lot of rain that week, which was more of a reason I wanted to go, because the trail would lead to some nice waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, and the waterfalls would be more impressive after a few days of rainfall. I only had to hike about 4 miles before getting to the Triple Falls, which was a really cool sight. A little piece of trivia: a scene in the Hunger Games was filmed at this waterfall. I took a few videos and pictures. As I sat on a rock for a bit, I noticed a woman in the woods on the trail. She was looking at me. I waved at her, trying to be polite. Then she just turned around and slowly walked deeper into the woods until she was out of sight. Not really something I gave a second thought to. Anyway, I wasn't tired yet. I had literally just started hiking, so I didn't sit for too long. I got up and headed back to the trail. I didn't want to try climbing the rocks of the waterfall because they were incredibly slippery. I continued to ascend up the trail and eventually came to the higher point of the falls called High Falls. I took a few more videos and pictures here and sat on another dry rock for a bit. I swear I felt the sense of déjà vu when I saw that woman again in the woods by the trail. Once again, she was staring me down. I didn't wave this time. I instead looked down at my phone, pretending not to notice or care. I couldn't help but glance up after like 10 seconds and now she was gone. If I had to guess, the woman was like 55. She had short grayish blonde hair from the looks of it, but again, she was pretty far away, so this was all just what I saw of her from a distance. I didn't see which way she went, but whichever way it was, I wanted to go the opposite. I kept walking the direction I'd been walking and eventually came to another landmark of the trail, the covered bridge. I once again stopped here to take a scenic video and a few photos. I drank a bit of my water and then looked at the end of the bridge from the side I had just walked from. I saw that woman. I swear I didn't see her there before. I started taking videos and pictures. I also didn't hear anyone walking behind me. She was once again staring right at me as if I were doing something wrong. I was getting annoyed. I started walking over to her and said, "Excuse me," but she just turned around and started walking away. The speed at which she was walking away for someone at her age was unsettling. I almost felt concerned at the possibility that she may have been somebody with special needs that needed help, but I didn't convince myself to go chasing after her. I just leaned on the edge of the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to turn back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes and it would take another 45 to get back down to the car. Walking back down the trail, I came in the direction that woman had gone. I passed a younger woman walking her dog, so I decided to stop her and ask if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no. We shared a laugh about it and I told her how I kept seeing that woman popping out of nowhere and looking at me, then just walking off. She laughed and said, "That's really strange." I didn't want to take up too much of her time, so after we both shared a laugh about it, I continued on my way. The entire way down the trail, I grew a bit paranoid that I'd see that woman lurking around in the background somewhere again, but all was quiet on the way down. I passed one other person who gave me a friendly smile and a nod. Other than that, I made it back to my car undisturbed. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I was seeing. We went to our favorite local bar to get some pumpkin spice beers and watch baseball. I told her about the woman on the trail and she found it amusing, because honestly it did sound funny. After that, I went home. Fast forward to That night when I was in bed, I hardly ever wake up in the middle of the night. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper normally, so me waking up in the middle of the night in the dark was unusual. I was still coming to when I heard something at the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the figure of a woman at the foot of my bed. I felt as though my insides had just fallen out of my body. I started screaming so loud that I'm sure my neighbors could have heard it even with the windows closed. I started crawling against my headboard, trying to distance myself as much as possible from the female figure at the foot of my bed. Then she just turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming, now more so trying to just catch my breath and slow my rapidly beating heart. I flicked on the lamp and started shouting, "Who is there?" I listened, but there was dead silence. I grabbed the knife I had in the nightstand next to my bed and jumped out of bed. I flicked on every light switch I passed until the entire apartment was lit up. There was no one there. Not in the closet, not behind a couch, not under any beds, and so I called my father. I didn't know what else to do. I needed to share what just happened with somebody. My father groggy picked up the phone, and after explaining to him, he said I must have hallucinated it while I was still in my half-asleep state. He said I wasn't fully awake yet, and so I could have been seeing things. I knew deep down he was probably right, but it didn't make the image I saw any less real looking or horrifying. And then I told him about the woman in the park and how the figure at my bed actually resembled her. He said if anything that further proves his point, that my brain conjured up a familiar image from earlier that day. Somehow I went back to sleep that night with my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser just in case. It wasn't until 2 days later that I heard from my mom that her sister in Germany died. I'd never met my aunt. She'd been basically estranged from my mom as she hadn't left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew to Germany to attend the funeral, and it wasn't until she got back home and I saw the prayer card with my aunt's face on it that once again I felt like my organs dropped out of my body when I realized she looked identical to the woman I saw on the trail that day and hallucinated at the foot of my bed. This story shook my whole family, especially because I told my dad about all of it and the hallucination before we even got news of my aunt's passing. I was born a Catholic but never found myself to be super religious after confirmation. But goddamn, does this really send shivers down my spine and make me question what exactly